Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me for this night's sleep story about a peaceful day in the life of a shepherd named Matteo and his trusted dog in the lush, mountainous pastures in northern Italy. Before we begin, I would suggest you to get comfortable, settling down under a warm and heavy blanket. It is time to let a long and tiring day come to its end. Sometimes this is easier said than done when anxiety and tension overcome us. When we get too involved with the unsettling thoughts in our minds, it prevents us from arriving at that relaxation we seek to finally drift off to sleep. In order for us all to wind down, there is one small exercise I would like to suggest we do right now. It helps soothe us when distressing thoughts bubble up inside. And thankfully, it is quite simple. What we are going to do right now is count our breaths, and meanwhile, take note of any thoughts and feelings as they arise. There is no need to attempt to change or suppress them in any way. Simply note their transient presence and then gently let them pass. The effect of this is that we will be able to create some distance between ourselves and the thoughts. We will not be too affected by them, which in turn helps us reach a restful state of mind. Now that you have gotten comfortable in your bed, we are going to start with just some nice, deep belly breaths. The official term for belly breathing is diaphragmatic breathing. Inhale through your nose, drawing in the air deep into your stomach, sensing your abdomen rise and expand. Then exhale slowly through your mouth. Allow your breathing to return to its natural rhythm. Feel how the weight of your body gently presses you down into your bed. Let's continue breathing, and now let's start counting 1 on the inhale, 2 on the exhale. We count up to 10, and when we reach 10, we will simply start anew. Remember, when an unpleasant thought arises and you begin getting distracted by it, note it as such. It's just a transient thought, without trying to suppress or avoid it. Just notice it for what it is. If there are any emotions associated with this thought, acknowledge them as well. Do not worry about suppressing them. Let them be there. Allow them to exist and to pass. They are here for this moment only. So now, before we get into the story of Matteo the Shepherd and his loyal dog, I will leave you some moments to count your breaths and gently note any thoughts and emotions that arise. The weather was warm for the late spring season, so Matteo decided to take his 22 sheep and lambs into the hills around town to let them graze on fresh grass. He walked up through the village towards the top of the hill with his best loyal German shepherd, Siberto, at his side. It had been raining earlier this morning, but it looked as if it would be dry today. However, there was still a slight chill in the air, making it feel quite crisp. As they crested over the last small rise before reaching the meadows, Matteo smiled and patted his dog, who was sniffing around excitedly along the edge of the trail. He picked up his staff, leaning against one of the nearby trees, which served as the unofficial signpost for travelers coming and going from town. With thick forests, rushing rivers, and lots of fresh spring water all around them, the region was not only a perfect place for traveling, but especially for herding livestock. They spent most days watching over the herd of woolly animals grazing on the verdant hillsides or resting under shade during the hottest part of the day. It was so peaceful that Matteo couldn't think of anything nicer than waking up every morning and heading into the mountains with his faithful companion by his side. It wasn't until he reached the top of the hill that Matteo saw the breathtaking countryside spread out beneath him. The tall, snow-capped Alps to the north, the bright blue water of Lake Como to the south. His house was built on the slope of a hill near a small creek running between two cliffs. The area behind his cottage was covered in carefully manicured rows of grapevines, surrounded by colorful flowers, neat flower boxes filled with dainty daisies, and beautiful apple trees laden with shiny green apples ready to be picked at any moment. To the right, there were berry bushes brimming with blackberries, just waiting to be gathered, while some young saplings were just beginning to sprout tiny white buds, still hidden among the lush foliage surrounding them. Siberto gave a little bark before trotting towards one of the newly growing trees, jumping onto its trunk like a ladder before digging his way up into one of the branches, where he immediately lay down, contentedly licking his paws in the sunbeams pouring through the leaves overhead. Matteo loved Siberto for being loyal, sweet-natured, and obediently working alongside him without ever complaining or taking an idle day off. He had nothing but love for this particular German shepherd, he would often stop what he was doing and sit patiently and watch him frolic and play around the meadows when the sheep went out to graze, playing chase after them with wide, innocent eyes, wagging his tail all the while with joyous energy. "I hope it'll be nice weather again today," thought Matteo as he began making his way home. A warm breeze caressed his cheeks, rustling his light brown hair. It carried with it the fresh scent of grass from faraway fields and forests, the heady aroma of wildflowers blooming under a summer sun. The cool air made his bare arms tingle and brought a sense of tranquility and peace over him that could only come from nature. A perfect ending to a pleasant morning stroll. It was time to return to the quaint hut that Matteo called his own, but not before taking the time to count up the flock once more to make sure nothing was missing or out wandering in search of greener pastures. With a whistle, he signaled to Suberto, who responded by leaping down and bounding towards him, tail wagging as if he was being summoned by the sound of a dinner bell instead of a familiar call. He counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. After counting the sheep and seeing they were all there, he placed his staff against one of the trees and slowly walked back down the hill to his house, taking deep breaths, witnessing the smell of flowers mixed with freshly turned earth beneath his feet, feeling his boots crunch along with every step on the gravelly soil as it gently shifted underneath them with each movement of his body. The forest opened up on his left, revealing the village below. It had grown considerably since last summer. Many new houses had been built between old ones. Small shops had popped up here and there around town square, while the roads leading from Matteo's home had widened into dirt pathways, which would be perfect for carting goods through without damaging the surface. The mountain road was a bit bumpier now than what it used to be, and most travelers needed a sturdy wagon to transport their goods. But that wasn't too bad at all, considering how much easier that made their lives. Matteo's cottage stood right next to the little creek that ran alongside his property. A modest dwelling made out of stone and wooden beams that sat upon the edge of a large field where his flock clustered in a woolly drove, guided by the barking Suberto, who now circled round the animals in delight. Matteo smiled contently, knowing Siberto took pride and energy from being able to help keep track of his sheep and herd them so perfectly. He opened the gate and called the dog over. "Come, boy, I'll give you some dried meat." He tossed the chewy treat over, and Siberto caught it in the ear. After putting away the rest of his belongings, Matteo prepared himself a nice, hearty breakfast before heading towards the shed behind the house with several logs piled high on one side. He pulled a small axe off the wall near him and began chopping wood with swift, deft movements, whistling as he worked, as he always did. He loved making sure that enough firewood stocked up for when winter arrived. He looked up every once in a while to admire the trees towering above him. They were full grown now, but only about 10 or so years old, judging by how tall and thick their trunks stood against the bright blue sky. Matteo didn't need to chop very many pieces down to reach what was needed to fuel his stove during the colder months. With a swing of his arm, he split each log into 2 large pieces, which laid neatly along the ground nearby. Another swipe of the axe, and afterwards there was nothing left but tiny chips of wood lying scattered around where the tree had been. The branches would be used for other things, like baskets or crates, and the shepherd made sure to stack them in the corner next to the pile, where he could easily find them later. After getting the backyard in order, Matteo decided to check on his sheep. They seemed to be doing just fine, happily grazed away, occasionally munching on grass or rolling in the soft earth. Once more, Matteo started counting his woolly, 4-legged companions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. With a satisfied sigh, Matteo returned inside, with Siberto following closely behind them. They went about their daily chores without any issues at all, as they did every day. And soon, Matteo was headed down the hill towards the village square, where people were already gathering by midday for the weekly market. Matteo's stomach rumbled in response to the smell of freshly cooked soup wafting from one of the little stands that dotted the market. It was his favorite place to get lunch, since the middle-aged lady named Gina, who ran the stand, always served up something delicious like baked fish or roasted chicken stuffed full of herbs. He also liked it because the market really was not too far from his home, making it easy for him to walk there whenever he felt like grabbing a bite. After Matteo returned to his cottage, Siberto eagerly waited for his master to come back into the house, then bounded over to greet him once more, before running off in search of whatever treasures he could find in the nearby meadows. After washing his hands and face and throwing on an old shirt and some clean trousers, Matteo opened the door wide enough so that Siberto could easily slip through when he came trotting around the corner again. "Good boy," said Matteo as he scratched behind the shepherd's dog's ears gently. Matteo knew just how good a companion Siberto was, but even still, the faithful dog would sometimes spend the entire afternoon looking for someone to play with if they had been cooped up inside for a while. "Oh, Siberto," said Matteo with a laugh as he placed another treat down in front of the excited dog and watched with delight as he darted forward and began devouring it right away. The German shepherd seemed very hungry indeed. Energy restored, Matteo was ready to tackle his next task, gathering his daily vegetables. He pulled 2 baskets from underneath his kitchen counter, where they were neatly tucked into little alcoves, picked several large bunches of greens from his vegetable garden, which lay beyond his little cottage, plopped them all into one basket before grabbing another smaller one and filled it to the brim with various types of berries hanging from the nearby bushes. 2 full baskets in his arms, the shepherd found Siberto waiting patiently by the fence line that surrounded his property, staring at something beyond it intently. As soon as Matteo got close enough to see what caught the dog's interest, he noticed someone standing against one of the trees that bordered the field. A little girl wearing a light blue dress that reached her ankles. Her hair was blonde, curly, sticking out every which way. She looked about 5 years old or so and greeted Matteo with a shy smile. "Good day to you, Angelina," called Matteo kindly towards the child, whom he had now identified as member of a neighboring family. Siberto approached Angelina with a wagging tail, barking loudly. The little girl ran off into the tall grass after letting off several playful barks herself. She then jumped out again and hugged Ziberto, who licked her face all over. Meanwhile, the sheep continued eating obliviously nearby. In the meantime, Matteo went around, filling both buckets with water from the creek that ran behind his house, and then filled up the trough for the animals to drink from. It was almost impossible for them to get thirsty during these times, because there was always plenty of fresh, cool water available to quench their thirsts for free. But he made sure they had something to drink anyway. They would have some nice new lambs soon, if everything worked out well the next few months. He remembered when he had been young, how exciting it had been to find newborn babies in your flock. They were adorable little creatures that one could hardly wait to pet and hold in one's arms and feed. Matteo shook himself out of reminiscing and returned to the fence line, where Ziberto was waiting patiently beside the little girl once more. "It looks like you two will be best friends," said Matteo with an encouraging smile. Angelina nodded and smiled at Ziberto, who barked happily again. It was now afternoon, and the sun shone brightly overhead. The wind blew softly over the field, carrying with it a scent of wildflowers that reminded Matteo of the past. He bent down and buried the fingers of his right hand into the soil of his field. To him, it hummed with energy in every crevice. The soil felt dense and full of vigor. He couldn't help but notice how soft it was on his fingertips, not rough or gritty in any way. It held onto moisture, letting water seep through its surface as if seeking out each and every little crack between particles so it could replenish itself. Matteo closed his eyes, took a deep breath, inhaling through his nose the crisp aroma of grass and flowers that grew around his feet. With a satisfied smile on his face, he held that breath for just a moment before exhaling slowly. His body relaxed instantly as he belly breathed deeply once more, focusing on his stomach expanding wide before he let the breath go in a satisfying exhale. He stood up, taking one last look at his beautiful meadow filled with green grass swaying gently in the breeze. A perfect place to live. Matteo walked back inside. "Time to give you some food," he said. He scooped some leftover vegetable stew from the pot and fed Ziberto, who was standing patiently by the door, waiting for another treat. Once Ziberto was sated again, Matteo gave him several rubs behind the ears, which the dog demonstrated his appreciation for by wagging his tail excitedly after each touch. As his last task of the day, Matteo was to lead the sheep into the pastures again so they wouldn't eat all of the good vegetation growing outside the fence line. For this, he used an old shepherd's staff that had seen better days but still worked perfectly well. After walking through the gate that separated his yard and field and closing it securely behind him, he began herding the flock towards a field hidden behind the rocky highland hills of the Lombardy region. For a shepherd, the vitality and health of the very earth that nourishes him and his herd is something to be respected, appreciated, and revered. The quality of the soil, the smells and sounds that emanate from it, all these things spoke to them in ways words can never hope to do justice. Matteo always carefully considered never to overgraze land or damage its integrity. And to that end, he did not mind leading his flock over the rocky obstacles of the mountains, patiently guiding them around one rock formation at a time until they were safely ensconced within one of the region's grasslands. As the sheep lazily chewed on grass and contentedly cropped at whatever edible plant they could find, Siberto trotted beside him, happily sniffing out at every little thing that caught his interest. The sun was starting to set beyond the distant horizon ahead, making the sky seem like the ocean in the distance with waves crashing upon rocks, while flashes of red light lit up the landscape. It was finally time to return home and get ready for another day's peaceful end. His shepherd's stick in hand, Matteo and Siberto led the herd on the trail homeward. Looking straight up into the vast expanse of the evening sky, Matteo started to spot stars begin appearing one by one, as if being revealed by some celestial stagehand. First, a bright star in the center of the sky, followed by a row of smaller ones running along the side, then another row and another. When the group arrived on the familiar and safe premise of his cottage, there were more stars speckled on the night sky than he could count. The sheep's barn was illuminated in a warm orange glow, originating from lanterns hanging from the ceiling. Siberto led the sheep inside, leaving Matteo to turn off the lanterns for today and close the door behind them. The only sounds heard now came from the sheep milling about together, rubbing against each other and getting comfortable. Matteo took one last look through a slit in the door, watching the lambs cozying up to their mothers in the dark with tired, heavy eyes. Soon, every animal was soundly asleep. Sighing with contentment, Matteo slowly climbed the stairs leading up to his bedroom at the top of the house. Recalling today's events in his head, Matteo sensed a gentle wave of deep gratitude wash over him. Being so close and in tune with Mother Nature every day reminded him how lucky he really was. A fortunate shepherd who had no desire for anything that nature wasn't able to provide him with. "Let's go to rest," the shepherd said softly towards Siberto as he sat down on the side of his bed. "It has been a good but tiring day." Siberto trotted to a spot at the foot of the bed, turned once or twice, and laid down. Even for the always energetic and joyous dog, it was time to sleep. The German shepherd soon fell into slumber. As Matteo climbed under the blanket, with his faithful companion lying beside him on the ground, he felt the peaceful silence fall on the cottage, the presence of nature seeping in through his window. Warmth and safety enveloped him in its comforting embrace. Inhaling deeply through his nose, Matteo held that breath for just a moment before letting it out all slowly, almost with a sigh. All was well when the shepherd closed his eyes and soon fell into a restful and relaxed sleep.